Silas Morin spent his last $15,000 on an abandoned farmhouse to give his little daughter a fresh start. But when he returned, smoke was rising from the chimney, and two strangers were living inside the home that was supposed to save them. He could have called the police. He could have thrown them out. Instead, he made a choice that would change all of their lives forever. The sun was already sinking behind the line of distant trees when Silas finally turned off the cracked country road and pulled into the gravel driveway of the farmhouse. Dust clung to the sides of his truck, the kind that came from hours of driving with too many thoughts and not enough conversation. In the back seat, 5-year-old Lenny had fallen asleep, her small hands still wrapped around her favorite stuffed rabbit. He had bought the house a month ago without ever stepping inside it. A desperate decision made in the middle of a lonely night when silence had become unbearable. He needed space, air, a place far away from memories he wasn't ready to unpack. But as soon as Silas stepped out of the truck, something felt wrong. Light flickered through the front windows. Silas froze. The house was supposed to be empty. His hand instinctively moved to the flashlight at his belt as he walked up the porch steps, each one creaking beneath his boots. The door wasn't locked. Slowly, he pushed it open. Warmth met him first, then the scent of burning wood. And then, two pairs of wide, terrified eyes point two young women stood in the middle of the living room, framed by a crackling fire, the floor freshly swept beneath their feet. One clutched a broom like a weapon. The other held a frayed blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "I'm sorry," the taller one blurted out, her voice shaking. "We thought the house was abandoned. We weren't trying to steal anything. We'll leave. Please don't call the police." The other nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "We just needed somewhere warm, just for a night or two." Silas stared at them, caught between anger and disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, a small voice interrupted the charged moment. "Daddy?" He turned to see Lenny standing in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She took one curious step inside, then another, studying the two women like they were characters from a storybook. "Are these ladies going to live with us?" The room went impossibly quiet. Silas looked at the sisters again, Talia and Mara, they had called themselves, and then down at his daughter. And for the first time in months, the house didn't feel empty anymore. Silas didn't call the police. He didn't raise his voice or demand answers the way he had practiced in his mind on the drive there. Instead, he stood in the middle of the living room, the fire popping softly between them, and asked a simple, almost broken question. "How long have you been here?" The taller sister lowered the broom slowly. "3 nights," she said. "Maybe 4. We lost track." She swallowed hard. "I'm Talia, and this is my sister, Mara." Mara's fingers twisted in the thin fabric of the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes never left Silas's face, as if she was waiting for him to change his mind. "We found this place by accident." The back door was already hanging loose. There was no for sale sign anymore. No cars. It looked forgotten. "Like us," Talia added quietly. The words landed with more weight than she could have known. Silas looked around the room again, at the swept floors, the stacked firewood, the small attempts to make the place livable. They hadn't treated the house like something to damage. They had treated it like shelter, like hope. "Tell me what happened," he said. The air felt heavy with everything that needed to be said. Talia glanced at her sister before speaking again, as if checking for permission to relive something painful. "Our mom worked at a manufacturing plant. Long shifts, dangerous equipment. One day a machine failed. They said it was operator error, even though she'd been there for nearly 15 years without a single incident." Mara's voice trembled when she spoke. She was crushed under a faulty lift. Not instantly. She suffered for days in the hospital. Silas's jaw tightened. Her company refused to take responsibility. "No prupe compensation." Just apologies and paperwork. Talia let out a humorless laugh. Medical bills came in faster than we could even read them. We sold her car, then our furniture, then our apartment. When Mom passed, her voice broke. We couldn't even afford a real funeral. Mara looked down at the floor. "They took everything from us, and then told us it was our fault for not having insurance." Silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was shared. Silas sat down slowly on the edge of the old wooden chair. The weight of his own story pressed against his chest, a familiar ache he usually kept locked away. But in front of these two strangers, it didn't feel as heavy to say it out loud. My wife died last year, he stated, simply. One minute she was laughing with Lenny in the kitchen. The next gone, a clot in her brain. No warning, no time for last words. His breathing hitched for just a second, then steadied again. She was my world. And that little girl out there? He nodded weakly toward the doorway. She was only 4. Overnight, I had to learn how to be 2 parents while barely still being one person. Talia's face softened. Mara whispered, I'm so sorry. So am I, he replied, almost to himself. For all of us. In that moment, something invisible but undeniable settled between them. A recognition, a shared language spoken only by the brokenhearted. Lenny's small footsteps padded across the floor again. She came to stand beside him, pressing her warm little hand into his. They're sad, she murmured. I know, baby, he answered. She looked up at Talia and Mara with wide, serious eyes. You can have my extra cookie if you want. Mara didn't even try to hold back the tears that fell. Silas stood slowly, the decision forming in his mind before logic could chase it away. I'm not going to call the police, he said firmly. Both sisters stiffened in confusion. This house is too big for just me and Lenny anyway, he continued. And clearly, you didn't break in to cause harm. He gestured around. You cleaned the place better than I ever could. Talia blinked. We'll leave if you want us to. We swear. No, he said, surprising even himself with the strength in his voice. You can stay. The words hung in the air. Mara gasped softly. Stay here. Stay, he repeated. But there are rules. You only fix this place up. Clean it. Repair it. Turn it into something livable again. In return, you have a roof, warmth, and food on the table. Talia searched his expression for a joke, for a catch. You don't even know us. That's true. His eyes met hers. But I know grief, and I know what it looks like to have nowhere left to go. Lenny beamed. Does that mean I'm getting sisters? Everyone froze. Silas let out a quiet, breathless laugh, the first one in months that didn't feel forced. I guess it does, he said. For the first time in a very long while, something unfamiliar crept into his chest. Not sadness, not fear, but the fragile, trembling beginnings of hope that it was risky. Illogical, probably foolish, but somehow it felt like the first right decision he had made since the world had fallen apart. And in an old, forgotten farmhouse, filled with cracks in the walls and cracks in their hearts, a new kind of healing quietly began. The farmhouse did not transform overnight. In the beginning, progress came in small, almost invisible victories. A cleared corner of the living room, a patched hole in the roof, a sink that finally stopped leaking. But every one of those victories carried something larger within it. It wasn't just the house that was being repaired. It was the people inside it. Each morning, Silas woke before the sun. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't woken by the familiar heaviness of grief pressing down on his chest. Instead, he heard the scratch of a broom across wood, the low hum of someone moving around the kitchen, the faint creak of footsteps overhead. Life existed around him now. Real, breathing life. Some days it was Talia on the front porch, her sleeves rolled up, already inspecting what needed to be done. Other days, it was Mara at the old, scratched table, scribbling numbers in a notebook she'd found buried in a box, calculating costs, making lists, mapping out a plan. They worked like people who had nothing left to lose and everything to rebuild. Talia surprised him the most. There was a natural confidence in the way she handled tools, as if she had been born with the knowledge threaded into her hands. She measured twice. She rarely made mistakes. She approached broken things without fear. Rotten beams, sagging steps, cracked plaster. That wall is still strong, she said once, pressing her palm against the old living room frame. It's just tired, just needs reinforcement. Silas watched her carefully, realizing the words were less about the house than about herself. Mara, on the other hand, brought order to the chaos. She took charge of what little money they had, budgeting each dollar, stretching it as far as humanly possible. She walked 4 miles into town and found work at a small diner off the main road. It's not much, she said the first evening she came home in a worn apron, her feet aching. But it's honest money, and the owner lets me bring home leftovers sometimes. From that day on, the kitchen was never fully empty. Lenny, of course, declared herself the official project supervisor. She spent her days in oversized boots Silas had found at the back of a closet, pretending to examine walls and floors with a seriousness that made them all laugh. "This part needs extra love," she would announce, pointing with her tiny finger. It looked sad. She created crayon drawings of their new home and taped them to the refrigerator. Bright suns, smiling stick figures, a garden overflowing with impossible purple flowers. "You're in charge of big decisions," Silas told her one afternoon as she inspected a freshly painted wall, her face thoughtful. "I know," she nodded. "I'm very important." And she was. Little by little, the farmhouse surrendered its loneliness. They rewired the old electric lines, replacing brittle, dangerous wires with something new. When the lights first flickered on properly, the entire room filled with a soft, warm glow, and all four of them stood there in stunned silence. "It's alive again," Mara whispered. Then Talia laughed, and Silas swore the sound echoed up into the roof beams like a blessing. They fixed the plumbing next. Cold water sputtered and spat before finally rushing clean and strong through the pipes. Lenny clapped as if watching magic. Outside, Silas started on the land. The ground was stubborn at first, dry and forgotten, but he worked it anyway. Talia joined him there too, her hands sinking into the soil, grounding herself in something real. Coin by coin, they bought seeds, tomatoes, beans, herbs, sunflowers. Soon, small green shoots began to break through the earth. Life returning in the evenings, when the tools were put away and muscles ached from honest work, they gathered in the living room with their backs against newly repaired walls. Music drifted softly from an old radio Mara had cleaned and fixed. Sometimes it was old blues, sometimes gentle jazz, sometimes gospel that made Silas close his eyes without even realizing he was doing it. Talia sang quietly under her breath as she cleaned paintbrushes, her voice low and warm. A lullaby for a house that had been sleeping too long. And Silas sat there and listened. He listened to laughter bubble up from the kitchen. He listened to Lenny's endless questions and wild stories. He listened to the soft sounds of two women who were no longer strangers moving through the same space as him. For the first time since his wife's death, the nights no longer felt endless. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in streaks of gold and violet, Silas stood on the porch and watched them. Talia was teaching Lenny how to plant seedlings in neat little rows. Mara stood nearby with her hands on her hips, laughing at something Lenny had said. Dirt marked their faces. Sweat clung to their brows. The air smelled of grass, earth, and something better. Belonging to sudden tightness filled Silas's chest. But this time, it wasn't grief, it was gratitude. He realized that for weeks, he hadn't dreamed about the night he lost his wife. He hadn't relived the hospital corridors, the cold hands, the silence after her final breath. His mind had been filled instead with plans for the next room, the next repair, the next day. The pain hadn't vanished. IT had softened. That night, over a simple dinner, vegetables from the garden, bread from the diner, laughter served generously. Talia caught him staring. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How strange life is," he replied honestly. "I bought this house because I was trying to run away from memories, and now it's giving me new ones." Mara exchanged a look with her sister. "Maybe you weren't running away at all," she said gently. "Maybe you were being led here." He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because in that moment, under the worn wooden beams of a once-abandoned farmhouse, surrounded by three hearts that had suffered and still chosen to love, Silas finally felt something he had not dared to feel in a very long time. Hope, not the loud, impossible hope of miracles, but the quiet, steady kind, the kind that grows, just like their garden did, slowly, stubbornly from ground that everyone else thought was dead. And in that growing hope, a new family was quietly taking root. The change between Silas and Mara didn't happen in a moment. There was no dramatic confession, no sudden kiss under a moonlit sky. No scene ripped from movie. Instead, it grew the way real healing does. Slowly, quietly, carefully. It lived in the way Mara began to leave a cup of coffee on the porch steps for him in the early mornings before he even asked. I in the way Silas memorized how she liked her eggs in the afternoon, just because he wanted to make sure she ate before rushing out to work. That I in the way their hands occasionally brushed in the kitchen, both of them pulling back just a second too late. Neither of them spoke about it at first. They had both lost too much to be careless with their hearts. Mara still carried the echo of her mother's laughter in her mind. Some nights, Silas would hear her crying quietly through the thin walls. Other nights, he would sit on the porch alone, staring out at the dark field, feeling the phantom weight of his wife's head on his shoulder. Grief was still there, but it no longer controlled the house. Talia noticed the shift long before either of them admitted it. One afternoon, as they were repairing a section of the porch railing, she leaned towards Silas and lowered her voice. You know, she doesn't look at you like she looks at anyone else, right? Silas pretended to focus on the nail beneath his hammer. She looks at me like I'm her landlord. She already has a landlord, Talia smirked. You, on the other hand, you're something else. He didn't answer, but his silence spoke for him. The truth was, Silas had started to feel it too. The warmth when she laughed, the calm when she stood beside him, the strange but comforting idea that he could imagine a future again, not replacing what he lost, not erasing it, but building something alongside it. Mara felt the same, and it terrified her. One evening, after Lenny had gone to sleep and Talia had retreated to her room with a book, Mara stepped out onto the porch where Silas Saturday the air was cool. Crickets sang in the distance. The world finally felt peaceful. Do you ever feel guilty? She asked quietly. He didn't look at her. Every day. For smiling again? For breathing when she can't? He answered. For feeling something that isn't pain. She nodded slowly. Me too. Silence fell for a long, heavy moment. Then Silas turned to her. But I also think maybe the people we lost wouldn't want us to live buried with them. Mara looked at him, then really looked at him, at the tired kindness in his eyes, at the man who carried his daughter on his shoulders, who worked until his hands bled, who had given two homeless sisters a second chance without ever asking for anything in return. But a tear slid down her cheek. I don't know when it happened, she admitted. But somewhere between the broken pipes and the garden and Lenny's bad singing, she let out a faint laugh. I started to feel safe again. And I think, she hesitated, I think you're the reason. Silas's throat tightened. Mara, I'm scared, she whispered. I don't want to replace anyone. I don't want to be compared to someone I never met. And I don't want to be another loss you have to carry. He gently reached for her hand for the first time. You aren't replacing her, he said softly. My wife will always be part of me, just like your mother will always be part of you. Love doesn't erase the past. It just grows beside it. Mara squeezed his hand. And we don't have to rush, he added. We can walk this road as slow as we need to. Her lips curved into a small, sincere smile. Together, together. Nothing more was said. Nothing more was needed. From that night on, something settled between them. Not urgency, not desperation, but understanding. Their connection was built on shared healing, on mutual respect, on the knowledge that both of them had walked through fire and somehow still believed in light. Meanwhile, the world outside the farmhouse began to change as well. With the house now mostly restored, Silas made a decision he'd been putting off for years. He reopened his construction business. Not as a lonely man trying to survive, but as a leader with a vision. The community had watched the transformation of the old farmhouse with quiet amazement. Word spread fast that Silas Walker was back in business, stronger than ever. People came to the door asking for repairs, rebuilds, new beginnings of their own. And when they did, it wasn't just Silas who answered the call. Talia stepped beside him as his partner. Her natural skill, her sharp eye, and her fearless approach to broken spaces made her a star in the field. Clients were stunned to see a woman climbing beams, lifting planks, directing crews with confidence and intelligence. She's the real brain behind the operation, Silas teased once. And you're the pretty face? She shot back. Together, they brought life back into homes that had long been forgotten. Just like their own, Mara, inspired by her experience working at the diner, found a new dream waiting inside her heart. She had always loved cooking, always used food as comfort, as love, as memory of her mother. One afternoon, as she prepared a simple meal for the house, Silas watched her in silence. "You've got a gift, you know that," he said. She glanced over her shoulder. "For burning vegetables? For making people feel something when they take a bite." A few weeks later, with the small savings she had finally built and encouragement from all of them, Mara started her own little catering company. At first, it was just church gatherings, then birthdays, then weddings, then full community events. Her name and her food quickly became known, and every time she returned home with tired feet and a proud smile, it was Silas who met her at the door, and he'd ask, "And they loved it?" She'd reply, "I'm in the middle of all this growth and change." Little Lenny blossomed more than all of them. The once quiet, confused child who had carried loss too big for her tiny heart now ran through life with laughter spilling out of her. Her teachers spoke of her creativity, her kindness, her sudden confidence. On the first day, she came home with a gold star on her paper. She ran straight into the house yelling, "Mama Mara, Aunt Talia, Daddy, look." Everyone froze. Then Silas slowly knelt down in front of her and smiled. "Mama Mara." She shrugged. "You said she wasn't replacing Mommy, so I just gave her own name." Mara pressed her hand to her chest, overwhelmed. "And Aunt Talia fits too," Lenny added, "because she yells like family." Talia gasped in mock offense. "I do not. You definitely do," Silas laughed. And in that moment, the truth became clear. They were no longer just people living under the same roof. They were a team, a unit, a family stitched together by loss and held together by choice and one had planned this, and one had expected it. But somehow, in the most broken, abandoned place any of them had ever known, they had found something rare, a second chance at life, a second chance at love, and a future no pain could take away. An unplanned family began to feel unbreakable. 1 year after the night that changed everything, Silas stood in the doorway of the farmhouse one last time. The building that had once been dark, forgotten, and broken now stood strong. Freshly painted walls, solid beams, glass windows reflecting the morning sun. The porch no longer sagged. The garden bloomed like something out of a dream. Even the air felt different, as if the land itself had healed. Behind him, Lenny skipped across the wooden floor, her voice echoing in a house that no longer felt lonely. "Are you ready, Daddy?" she called. He glanced around slowly, letting the memories rise and fall like gentle waves. Not the painful ones, but the beautiful ones. Laughter around the dinner table. Music drifting through open windows. The sound of tools, voices, life returning. "I'm ready," he said at last. They weren't leaving the farmhouse behind in sadness. They were leaving it in gratitude. The new home in town wasn't grand or extravagant, but it was warm, safe, and filled with light. A place close to Lenny's school, close to Silas and Talia's growing construction business, close to the community that had watched in quiet awe as their lives transformed. But the farmhouse was not for sale. Silas refused every offer, every curious investor, every neighbor who wanted to buy the land. "That house isn't just wooden nails," he explained. "It's proof that broken things can live again. Someday, someone else might need that proof." So it stayed, standing tall, like a monument to second chances. In January, when winter wrapped the world in stillness, Silas and Mara were married in grand venue. No expensive decorations, just a small church, wooden benches, and people whose hearts understood the journey that had brought them there. Talia stood at Mara's side as her sister. Lenny stood between them as the flower girl, the ring bearer, and the loudest clapper in the room. When Silas lifted Mara's veil, his hands trembling slightly, the room watched with quiet reverence. "You didn't save me," Mara whispered. "You found me while I was learning how to save myself. And you taught me how to live again," he replied. Their vows weren't promises built on fantasy. They were promises built on truth, on survival, on resilience, on the decision. Every single day to love again. The moment they were pronounced husband and wife, Lenny rushed forward, throwing her arms around both of them. "That's where we became a family," she announced proudly. pointing through the church doors in the direction of the old farmhouse. Everyone laughed. Some cried, because they all knew she was right. That abandoned building had given them more than shelter, IT had given them each other. Months later, on a warm spring afternoon, they returned to the farmhouse together. Not to live there, but to remember. They sat on the porch side by side, watching the sun dip low over the land that once felt cursed and now felt blessed. Talia rested her head back against the railing. You know, the world tells stories of luck and miracles. But what we found here, she looked at the house, then at Silas, at Mara, at Lenny. This was choice. Every day, Silas smiled. In love, Mara reached for both their hands. In family, once it had been about survival. Now it was about legacy, belonging, healing. Home, because sometimes the most powerful families aren't born in perfect places, they're born in forgotten ones, rebuilt by broken hands, and held together by love that refused to give up. Some of the most powerful miracles don't arrive in perfect packages. Sometimes they arrive as strangers in an abandoned house, as broken people, as impossible decisions. And when you choose kindness instead of fear, compassion instead of control, you don't just change a moment. You change a lifetime. Because the greatest homes are not made from wood and stone. They're built from second chances.